Earlier this week I did a review of these awesome magical glitter swirly dice. They're extremely popular right now and for good reason. They look great. I think I finally nailed down a consistent process to be able to get these results every single time. So let me show you how I did it. The dice that I'm trying to replicate are the ones from Dr. Bell Cookie Games that I reviewed just a few days ago. I'm going to use them in my normal dice molds, but how I'm replicating them is with these small little glass orbs with an opening on them. I'll put a link to those in the description down below. I think they're going to give me a pretty similar results. I'm using those as well as some UV resin to create this kind of glittery swirl effect with some water and glitter on the inside. That will be the final result there. So I'm taking UV resin as well as a small little UV flashlight to cure the resin on there. The reason being the UV resin will blend in well with the rest of the resin that I'm going to coat the dice in. If I did something else, it would show up. I'm using mica powders for the glitter in here, Duo Red and Macro Pearl, which we'll talk about those because that's not what you just saw in the beginning, but we'll get into that. I want to show you things that I mess up on as well. Make sure you're wearing your gloves and a respirator that's good for fumes and ventilation throughout this whole process because it will get all over your hands and up in your lungs, and you don't want that. So I take a coffee stirrer and use it to put some of the glitter in those glass orbs. You don't really need much. All that I'm using is that small amount there, which you can see is really a very, very tiny amount. Less is more in this case. I ended up doing a little more is more when I first tried this out, but you really don't need it. There's enough glitter in there to swirl around in the water just fine. Wipe the excess off with your finger so that there's none sticking to the glass as best you can, and I use the silicone molds to hold these up as I do the UV resin process. I'm using this little water dropper here to fill them up with water, and I think water is the best thing to do. You could possibly use mineral oil to fill these up with. Somebody actually suggested using baby oil, and I did try that, but I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Fill these up to the absolute brim. In this case, I left room for an air bubble because I thought maybe the resin would kind of fill up the rest of it. Don't do that. Fill them all the way up, and I'll show you why later. But using the baby oil, you can see here when you shake it up, it doesn't show any sort of movement on the inside. So I recommend using water. You can dye the water with food coloring or alcohol ink, but just be sure you don't miss like I do. This comes into play later, and I'll show you why that's a problem. I think that that's what he does because the water seems to be a color while the rest of the glitter is kind of a silver. Now we're going to take this UV and pour it over the lid and then cure it immediately with our UV curing light here. This will cure it in about 10-20 seconds, enough to where it's hard enough to add another layer on there. The whole goal is to cap up that opening. Again, we're doing this with resin so that when we coat the dice with other resin, it blends in and you won't even see that resin. If you were to do that with silicone or hot glue to cover the entrance, you'd still be able to see it. So you can see here in a more close-up view, I try and go all the way around the outside of the lid and cure as much as I can before it drips down on the inside. Do the same thing. Think of it like soapy bubble water that you're trying to cover over the bubble wand and seal up fast, except in this case, you're curing the bubbles to a rock hard state with the UV light. Again, only about 20 seconds is enough to where I can put another layer on there and build this up. You can see this sticks a decent ways over the glass, which is why I wanted to use resin so that you can't see it. It says it takes 2 to 4 minutes. I leave it on there for about 10 minutes because I'm not sure how strong my UV light is, but eventually I get some awesome results. You can see here, shaking it up, it has some fantastic swirls, but there are huge bubbles in the top of these. So that's flaw number one. We're going to talk about some other flaws that you'll see here. There's a lot of cuts because I wanted to show you what they look like swirling, but they only swirl for like half a second, so I had to do some jump cuts there. Now that we have our completed orbs that are going to be the swirly effect on the inside, we can fill our molds with these orbs. They are going to try and be suspended in the very center of our D20 dice. If you want to put them in smaller dice, I'm going to recommend that you get some smaller orbs so that the resin can completely encase them with that weird hand motion that I did there. Now I'm using Art and Glow resin. It's kind of my go-to one. I think it works well here. It works well in all other cases. I'll put the safety data sheet for it as well as the UV resin in the description of the video below. This is an equal part by volume resin, so I mix up 1 part A to 1 part B and mix it up for a solid 5 minutes to make sure that it is thoroughly mixed. At the end of the 5 minutes, I put 2 drops of this liquid glitter inside my resin. It's not enough to make it a glittery shell, but just enough to where it sparkles if you hit it at the right angle. Again, I normally use pipettes, but I just happened to run out of them and needed to use this. I fill up just a little bit on the bottom of the mold so that when I push these down, they're not touching the silicone down at the bottom, and there's a better chance that there won't be a air gap in my resin down at the bottom, causing this to be a failed set of dice. It still fails, but I'll show you why, because that's not exactly the reason. I take the little needle nose tip on there, or you can use a pipette, and load it up slowly. If you load it up too fast, you're guaranteed to get some air gaps and bubbles. Definitely load it up slow and let it kind of build its way up from the bottom to the top. Push it to one side of the mold and fill it up with a lot of excess resin in the top. Now I'm putting mine in a pressure pot, and here's where mistake number 2 comes in. When I put this in the pressure, I was really afraid of the glass encasement that I just made breaking due to pressure, so I filled it up really slowly, and I only filled it up to about 15, maybe 20 psi, which is not really enough for resin. It needs to be at about 30 or 40 psi. After trying it, my dice don't seem to break, but it caused these huge gaps and voids in the end of the dice, which are repairable if you do some resin work, but not something I wanted to mess with right away. So I decided to give this a second shot. Those are still okay dice, and I can fix them later maybe, but they're not ideal. I want to be able to get it right the first time. So let's take another crack at this with another set of glitter. We're going to use some brilliant gold, which of course I like, as well as that macro pearl again. So I'm going to fill up another set of the glass orbs with the brilliant gold. Again, we don't really need much of the mica powder, less is more here, and I'm going to fill up another set with the macro pearl. I was going to use that red alcohol ink in the back, but after filling these up with water, I thought they actually looked pretty darn good on their own. These ones you can see I filled up all the way to the brim with water. There are no air bubble gaps in there because that looked really bad in the final results of the other ones. I wanted to make sure that there was no possible little bubbles if I could avoid it. You can see by the time I get to the silver one, I've kind of nailed this process down. In one go, I can completely cover that thing with resin, and I just coat some extra to kind of flatten it out along all sides and ensure that there's not going to be any gaps or leaks of the water on the inside. I mix up another set of the Art and Glow resin. Again, it's 1-to-1 parts. I make extra because I'm using some of the leftover resin for another project that I'm working on. Again, fill it up with 2 drops of the liquid glitter, mix it in. It's a little bit shiny. We're not going for completely shiny. We just want a tiny bit of glitter to be on the outside to make them stand out. Fill up the bottom of the molds with just a little bit of resin, and you can see here the gold looks fantastic, as does the silver on its own. It really didn't need any extra additives. This makes it look like an awesome snow globe, and the silver one looks obviously great, but you know, I do have a soft spot in my heart for the gold. Why wouldn't I? Fill it up nice and slowly the same way we did for the other dice, and this time when putting it in the pressure pot, I changed up the amount of pressure. I put it to my normal dice pressurization, about 35 psi. I really listened to make sure that the glass didn't break because I was very scared of that, but bada bing bada boom, we have some awesome finished dice there. We've got a gold set and a silver set. I'm going to cut the sprues off of them. I take them immediately out of the pressure pot and cut the sprues while they're still a little bit soft. It makes life just that much easier. I take an X-Acto knife to cut the tips off, and then I sand it down to where I get it to where I want it. Now I have the completed silver one. The silver one is fantastic. It is absolutely gorgeous, and that's the one we're going to be working on moving forward because remember that blue dye? Yeah, well, apparently there was still some left in the mold when I did it, and it completely ruined the gold set. That's okay. It was a little bit off center. The sharp edge dice are better for this. It makes it easier for them to stay center. So we'll just call this one a wash and move on to inking the silver one. I'm using Auric Armor Gold paint to ink it because I will implement gold into anything and everything that I can in my life, and I think that makes for a good silver and gold kind of wish style dice, which is what I'm going to call this dice. It's my wish dice. You can see when it's not moving, the glitter all piles to the bottom, but after you shake it up, it is phenomenal looking. This is by far my favorite dice that I've ever made. It is just gorgeous as it rolls with all the glitter. The gold and the silver is a phenomenal color together. It was my favorite versions of Pokemon, so why wouldn't I like the gold and silver? And I don't got anything bad to say this one. I'm very proud of this dice. I know that others make them better, and I'm sure that this is not how Dr. Bell Cookie and them make their dice, but this is how I make it, and I can get a pretty consistent result, so I'm happy with it. You can see even just turning it, the glitter kind of moves in and on its own there. But there is one thing that I do want to mention, and it's something that's been going on my channel for a while, and I'm sure some of you are tired of hearing about it, that, you know, I had to sacrifice my wife for the soul stone. So I think it's time that we finally remedy that situation, and I'm gonna roll and cast Wish to bring her back. Oh my god. What Is that a natural 20? Am I gonna get my wife back? Is my wife coming back? Baby, you're here!
Hey, missed you.
You too, I guess.
This joke wasn't worth the wait, was it?
Oh god, no. Not at all. Thank you for watching my videos. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. Maybe subscribe if you might want to see some more content like this for some DIY D&D stuff, or check out some of my other videos. I already have a decent amount out, and I try and do at least one a week. So thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it. Maybe check out some people who sell these kind of dice, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.